Hi, this is George Bernstein, and you're listening to Everything Fab Four on Salon.com.
Welcome to Everything Fab Four, a podcast focused on fun and intelligent stories about the Beatles. I'm your host, Ken Womack, music culture columnist for Salon.com and a Beatles scholar and historian. No other band, or popular phenomenon for that matter, has enjoyed the global impact the Beatles have and continue to have more than 50 years later. They are part of our human fabric. They created music that continues to bring people together, and just about everyone has their own Beatles story to tell, some that are surprisingly deep and unexpected. This show seeks to draw those stories out in interesting and insightful ways. Remember, it's a Beatles world, and everyone has a story.
So Alexander and I accompanied our dad to the Ed Sullivan Theater, and we were escorted backstage to the dressing room where the Beatles were hanging out. And when that usher knocked on the door with the star on it, that was the most exciting moment of my entire life. Before the door opened, like the anticipation was off the Richter scale.
Today's guest is Jamie Bernstein, an American author, narrator, director, broadcaster, and filmmaker. Her 2018 memoir, Famous Father Girl, traces the story of growing up with composer-conductor Leonard Bernstein and pianist and actress Felicia Montealegre in an atmosphere bursting with music, theater, and literature. Famous Father Girl served as the inspiration for the Academy Award-nominated movie Maestro. The New Yorker praised Jamie's book as being unique among classical music memoirs for its physical intimacy, its humor and tenderness, and its ambivalence toward an irrepressible family genius. The existence of this well-written book, with its poignancy and its shuddery detail, is a mark of Jamie Bernstein's sanity and survival. In telling her father's story, she got to write her own. Over the years, Jamie has written and narrated concerts about Mozart, Aaron Copland, and Stravinsky, as well as the Bernstein Beat, a family concert about her father modeled after his groundbreaking Young People's Concerts. She appears worldwide, performing her own scripted narrations as well as standard concert narrations such as Copland's A Lincoln Portrait and her father's Symphony No. 3, Kaddish. Jamie has produced and hosted the New York Philharmonic's live national radio broadcasts as well as many summer broadcasts from Tanglewood. She recently narrated the podcast The New York Phil Story, Made in New York. Jamie is the co-director of Crescendo, The Power of Music, an award-winning documentary film focusing on children in struggling urban communities who participate in youth orchestra programs for social transformation. Jamie's articles and poetry have appeared in such publications as Symphony, Town and Country, and Opera News, among others. Welcome, Jamie Bernstein. Some of my favorite stories about the Beatles involve your father, and actually his easy and early acceptance of them. I remember reading his quote when I was quite young about A Day in the Life, about how it sustains him. It was such a wonderful and warm way to think about such an important song.
Yeah, he was a real fan.
Yeah.
Honest to gosh fan. It's really true.
I wonder but if we could start off and you could say a little bit about growing up in that musical family.
You know, what was it like growing up in my family with that larger-than-life guy for a father? And not surprisingly, my brother and sister and I get asked this question a lot. And so my short answer became, well, it wasn't boring. But then the longer answer turned out to be my memoir, Famous Father Girl. And the reason I had a memoir to write at all is precisely because it wasn't boring and there were lots of stories to tell. So I assembled everything into this book, this memoir, which came out in my dad's centennial year, 2018. So just to back up, the reason I called my book Famous Father Girl is that that's what my second grade classmate, Lisa, used to call me to tease me, Famous Father Girl, because he was famous. And the reason even a second grader would know who Leonard Bernstein was is that my dad was on television. And back then, everything was about television and everybody watched television. And what's more, everybody watched television together in their households on their single screen in the living room, that big old TV console in the living room. And so I love talking about my dad to young people today. And when I get to this part of my account and I describe how the entire family would sit down together, all the generations, and watch TV together on their single screen, I say, so how many screens do you have in your house? Really? Go ahead, count them up. You have to count all the TV monitors and then the desktop computers and the laptops and the tablets and the phones, and the kids all go crazy counting on their fingers. And then I say, so have you run out of fingers yet? And of course, many of them have. And it's a great way to illustrate how different the world is now from the way it was when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s. And it's also, it illustrates why my dad and his young people's concerts on television became so enormous and had such a gigantic impact on the culture, because everybody watched it together. And there were only 3 main channels. And so everybody was watching the same thing. So a young people's concert could get an enormous viewership over the course of their, being shown on Sunday afternoons or sometimes on prime time on CBS over the years. So anyway, my dad quickly figured out that by including pop music examples on his young people's concerts, it was a really great way to retain the interest and focus of the kids in the audience. So, for example, when he was explaining modes, which are these different ancient scales that different melodies can be in, when he got to the Mixolydian mode, he went to the piano and played and sang You Really Got Me by the Kinks. Da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, girl, you really got me going. You got me so I can't sleep at night. Da-da-da-da-da. And we all loved that song. And we were in the car once with our dad, my brother and I. Our sister was still a baby, but we were in the car. And our dad always wanted to listen to the pop station. Let's catch up, he would say, and switch on the knob. And one day, You Really Got Me came on, and he said, hey, you know what? This song is in the Mixolydian mode. Do you know what a mode is? No, of course we didn't know what a mode was. So he explained it to us right there in the car. And then a few months later, what was the next young people's concert about? Modes. And that's why when he got to the Mixolydian mode, he went to the piano and sang You Really Got Me, and all the kids loved it. And then when he talked about sonata form, he talked about how sonata form, which goes, A, B, A, he said it's just like the average pop song goes A, B, A, except the first A gets repeated twice usually. So it's A, A, B, A, but it's basically the A, B, A form. And he goes to the piano and he says, so let's look at a typical pop song. In fact, let's look at a typical Beatles song. And he plays and sings in his terrible gravelly voice, And I Love Her, to demonstrate ABA form. And all the kids in the audience go nuts. And the reaction shots are so hilarious. You can see these on YouTube. Many of these young people's concerts are on YouTube, and they're all going to be unrolled on Carnegie Hall Plus, which is Carnegie Hall's new streaming service. So You can look up what is a mode, and you can look up what is sonata form, and you can see all these examples of my dad singing pop tunes. But when it came to the Beatles, they were the best band of them all. And he really put them in the same category with, American songbook composers and Schubert when it came to, the inventiveness and the melodic quality of Beatles songs. So it was really fun for me as a kid to talk about the Beatles with my dad. And I learned so much about music just by sharing Beatles music with my dad. And the minute a new album came out, I would buy it at the record store and run straight into my dad's studio. Look, Daddy, I got Rubber Soul. And we would sit down and listen to it,
Now, when it came to the Beatles, you were an early adopter, right?
Yeah, well, I was only 11 when they first came on my radar. And they came on my radar in the fall and winter of 1963, excuse me. And then in just a few months later, in February of 1964, they came to America. On that fateful day, they came to Idlewild Airport, which had just been renamed for the assassinated President JFK. And then they went on the Ed Sullivan Show. So by then, I had already become obsessed because I got completely consumed by this promotional campaign that those pop stations we listened to all the time were pouring into my ears. So I was completely prepped. I made my parents allow us to wheel the little TV from the living room into the dining room so we could watch the Ed Sullivan Show at 8:00 while we were eating dinner.
Oh, that was big stuff then.
Very big. The biggest. There was absolutely no question of missing that seismic event.
So were you and your father then equally transfixed that night?
Well, look, I was the one who was madly in love with them, so that was different.
And having dreams about them.
My father was really keen to see them too. Sorry, what?
And you were having dreams about them, no less.
Yes, I was. I was dreaming regularly about the Beatles. I was completely a capital B Beatle maniac. The real deal. I was obsessed.
And it must have been quite a joy then for you and your family to experience those records as they come out one after another. You mentioned Rubber Soul, and then it's a parade of masterworks really at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, and imagine being the exact right age to witness the parade in real time. So it was just the most thrilling and fortunate thing that could have happened to me in my childhood, really, was to grow up with the Beatles sort of, providing my soundtrack as I was getting older. And what was so cool, of course, was that as I got older, the Beatles music itself was evolving in this fascinating way. And by the time I was 14, they were putting out Sgt. Pepper, and I could hardly keep up. They had gone to such a new and higher, and I use the word advisedly, plane of musical performance and experience. It was just incredible what was happening to the Beatles as I was struggling to catch up with what they were doing.
So I know some folks, obviously it's the soundtrack to the Summer of Love, but some people found that they'd gone too far, right? I take it that wasn't a concern for you. Growing up in a musical family, the idea of inventiveness and experimentation.
Yeah, they've gone too far thought never crossed anyone's mind in our family. And my father was almost as obsessed with Sgt. Pepper as I was. We played it constantly. We were parsing every song. We were talking about the structure and how did they do that? And A Day in the Life, of course, was so crazy and phenomenal and groundbreaking that, we just never ran out of stuff to talk about. And I feel tiny bit sorry for some of our parents, house guests, friends who would come over to visit or have dinner, whatever it was, and my dad would make them sit down and listen to Sgt. Pepper. And of course, I was thrilled, but I can imagine that some of these grown-ups were a little restless.
He must have had just an incredible musical imagination all his own, your father. Seems like
we know for a fact how enormous his musical imagination was, because his own compositions span such an enormous inventive and creative spectrum. You know, he wrote everything from operas to rap songs. Yes, he wrote one rap song.
Hey, one's enough though. He spanned all those genres, right? That's incredible.
We decided that one was enough, and we didn't invite the world to listen to it. We didn't think it was too swell, but my goodness, you know, he wrote Broadway shows, and he wrote ballets, and he wrote symphonies, and everything. So he was the first guy to appreciate when songs came in multiple flavors. And, you know, record companies really like it when their successful artist sounds exactly the same from one record to another, because it saves them the time and trouble of figuring out how to newly promote this band or artist, right? Mm-hmm. But in case of the Beatles, they were doing something different on every single recording. And that was one of the reasons that my dad loved and respected them so much, because you never knew what they were going to come up with next.
Well, he loved that variety himself. My first moment with his compositions was in my high school symphony orchestra when we did the overture from Candide.
Oh, how great!
You know, I mean, that was as powerful as any pop song for me. It goes to so many different places. It's just magnificent.
It is magnificent. And you know what's amazing is that it's true that it goes to a lot of places, but all the places that the Candide Overture and Candide itself goes to, all those places tend to be in a European context. Sometimes people refer to Candide as my dad's love letter to Europe, Valentine to Europe, because it uses all these different European flavors, dance rhythms, and, you know, all these different tropes from European folk music and classical music. At the same time that he was writing Candide, he was simultaneously writing West Side Story, if you can believe that, which is all bebop, jazz, and Latin Caribbean music. I mean, talk about different flavors. And he was writing them all at the same time.
That's incredible. What a rich world that is. Variegated even. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling. And what's really surprising is that there are actually 2 songs we know of that migrated from Candide over to West Side Story, and you wouldn't think that would be possible. But it happened. And one of them is One Hand, One Heart, which was the original love song duet for Candide and Cunegonde, but the authors decided it wasn't funny enough. And, you know, Candide's supposed to be a comedy, so they cut it. And then my dad recycled it and put it in West Side Story very effectively. And then the other song, you'll never believe what the other song is that started in Candide. You want to guess?
I don't even think I could hazard a guess at this point.
Yeah, well, you probably wouldn't guess. It's Officer Krupke. Isn't that astonishing? It started over in Candide and wound up in West Side Story. Crazy.
That is amazing. Well, it is the best of all possible worlds.
Yes, it is. And those worlds are multitudinous.
So, you know, there's all of this, of course, Beatles admiration in your household. You would even take to performing, right, some of their music, such as, I believe, Love Me Do.
Oh, yeah. Well, Love Me Do was one of the very first songs the Beatles ever released in the U.S. It was one of the first 3, I think, along with I Want to Hold Your Hand and She Loves You. And I think Love Me Do was the first single in the UK, if I'm not mistaken. And so that was one of our favorites. And we're in the summer of 1964, right? And we're all in our house in Connecticut, and we're just hanging out in the pool on a really hot day, literally in the pool. We're just sort of lounging in the pool and paddling around and chatting and singing. And it really bugged my dad that there were only two harmonies in Love Me Do. So we couldn't, all three of us, my brother and him and me, sing the song together. So he made up a third line. So one of us was singing the tune, Love, Love Me Do. And then the other one sang Love, Love Me Do, which is the harmony. And then my father added Love, Love Me Do. So we could all sing in three-part harmony.
Oh,
that's the kind of household we were having.
Now, is it correct that many years later, when John and Yoko become neighbors, you would even perform for them?
Oh, that is not exactly true. No.
Oh, well, tell us the real story.
Okay, well, let's see. There was this time in 1965 when our dad was very interested in John Lennon's book of poetry, In His Own Right, W-R-I-T-E. And he was even contemplating setting some of those poems to music. And unfortunately, he never got around to doing that. But because he looked into it a little bit, it gave us an entree to go to the dress rehearsal for the second time the Beatles went on the Ed Sullivan Show. This is now summer of 65, so it's like a year and a half after the first time, right?
The debut of Yesterday in Shea Stadium, yeah.
Right, it was that summer. So we were invited to go to the dress rehearsal, my brother and I accompanying our dad. Our poor sister Nina missed all of this because she was just a baby. She's very bitter about all that. Anyway, so Alexandra and I accompanied our dad to the Ed Sullivan Theater, and we were escorted backstage to the dressing room where the Beatles were hanging out. And when that usher knocked on the door with the star on it, that was the most exciting moment of my entire life. Before the door opened, like the anticipation was off the Richter scale. And anyway, when we met the Beatles in that dressing room, I think we may have demonstrated to them how we would sing one of these poems from In His Own Right as a round. It was a game that my father invented where whoever started the round got to make up a tune. And then whoever came in next and next after that had to copy the tune. And of course, you can't do all that. It's impossible to be listening for the next line while you're singing the last line. It's a train wreck every time. And that was the fun of it. So I think maybe we demonstrated this.
The moldy man, right?
The moldy man.
Yeah.
I'm a moldy, moldy man. I'm moldy through and through. I'm a moldy, moldy man, though you may not think it true. I'm moldy till my eyeballs. I'm moldy till my toes. I will not dance, I shy balls. I'm such a humble Joe. That's the poem.
Nice.
And so the great thing about singing it as a round is that whoever came in third on the round is stuck all alone at the end, singing all by him or herself, I'm such a humble Joe, which made you always feel like a kind of idiot. So it was very fun to tease the person who came in last. Anyway, we demonstrated this for the Beatles, God help us all, and I don't think they thought it was very amusing. But I cannot swear on a stack of Bibles that this happened on that occasion. Maybe we did it for John Lennon all those years later when he was our neighbor in the Dakota. Maybe we did, but I don't think it went well if we did it then either. I just remember embarrassment.
But that was part of the design, right? In a way.
Yeah, that's true. So it served its purpose, I guess.
Well, maybe they were in show mode that day, right? You're getting ready. They've got a big week's coming their way.
Yeah, no kidding.
So Do you have any memories of them when they do, in fact, become neighbors?
Only one, really. And it's funny because each of us who had the experience remembers it differently. But although they were our neighbors, we hardly ever saw them. But one year there was a potluck in the courtyard of the Dakota, to which every resident in the Dakota was invited, and you were supposed to bring something, right? And John and Yoko came with Sean in a pouch because he was such a little baby. And John and Yoko brought macrobiotic snacks because they were very anti-sugar and you had to be healthy and be macrobiotic. But we ran into John at the dessert array. And he was standing right next to me and my sister and my best friend, Anne, who was my fellow Beatle maniac, right, from school, although this was now years later. And all three of us heard John say, "Don't know what to have. I want something mushy and disgusting." And we were all, needless to say, enchanted, practically weak in the knees with delight that we had overheard John say that. But Nina has one version of the story. I have another version, and Anne has a third version. So it's Rashomon time.
So what are the differences then in the narratives?
Oh, I don't know. First of all, I had not even remembered that my sister was there. Just the other day, we were talking about this incident, and Nina said, I was totally standing there, and I had not remembered that. And then Anne
carries some stuff around, doesn't she?
Yeah. And then Anne remembers it some other way, too. I can't remember now, but we all have slightly different memories of the occasion. But we all remember what he said.
Did he have dessert?
Something mushy and disgusting.
Did he end up having some dessert?
Yeah, he did. And I don't think he was supposed to, since he was so macrobiotic and all. Maybe he was doing it while Yoko wasn't looking.
Could be, right? I mean, it's a potluck. You never know what's going to arrive.
That's right. But they were the ones who brought the macrobiotic food. And there he was bellying up to the dessert table. So I have questions.
Did the family still live there on that awful night?
Not only were we still living there, but I was there that night, even though I was living in California at the time. But I was home visiting. And I was upstairs on the 9th floor in what used to be my dad's studio and was now a sort of like a guest room that I was staying in. And I heard the shots. I heard the shots and I thought, and I was playing the piano and I froze. I thought, what was that noise? Well, it can't be a gun on Central Park West and 72nd Street. That's impossible. I guess it was just a truck backfiring. And I went back to playing the piano. Then my phone rang about 2 minutes later. And it was a friend of mine saying, oh my God, they just shot John Lennon. Turn on the radio. They're talking about it. At which point I started hearing all the bulletins and the details. And then they announced from the hospital, they announced that he was dead. And I mean, I can't even describe the horror and the despair. And I remember just, running down the stairwell, the back stairs of the Dakota, down to the 2nd floor where our main apartment was. And my dad was there. And it was just my dad and me there. And we sat together in his studio, just crying and drinking for a couple of hours. We were so upset. It was horrible.
It remains so, doesn't it? I mean, it doesn't go away. It's
it really does not go away.
Such a blight.
Yeah, that was sort of, well, it's the equivalent in my generation of how my parents felt when JFK was assassinated back in 1963. And this is now, 80, what was it? 83?
1980, 17 years later. Yeah.
Exactly. Horrific.
As horrific as it is, I'm so glad you were there with your father. He probably needed you.
Well, I needed him. So there you go. And to think that that very morning. We had flown back from Washington, D.C., where the night before my father had gotten the Kennedy Center honor. And then the following morning, we flew home and, arrived back at the Dakota and got out of the car and walked right past that guy and into the building. Because, there was always a little crowd of people out there. After that day and night, though, they made a rule at the building that people were no longer allowed to gather in front of the gate.
Right. Of course, we were all so much different and innocent, right? That was not something folks were afraid of.
Right.
I vividly remember the fear was a kidnapping, right? The 70s had been the age of kidnapping and hijacking.
Right. Well, that changed.
It did in a hurry. It sure did.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're in a season where we're thinking a lot about movies. Can you tell me about working with the team on Maestro?
Sure. Well, what an experience we had. And this experience has just more or less come to a close. Yesterday, my brother and sister and I flew home from LA, where we were attending the Oscars, where, as you know, Maestro had 7 nominations, but didn't win anything. But it was so exciting to be there. Never before or again will we have this experience of attending the Oscars. So it was splashy and exciting and fun. And we all agreed that when we landed yesterday in JFK, we had all turned back into pumpkins. And now life will be normal again. But for the past few years, we have been on this unbelievable ride where Bradley Cooper made this film, and the way he decided to make it was a very intimate and personal story about our family. And, the project that he inherited was originally a more conventional biopic, but he wound up deciding to make a completely different kind of movie that was really a portrait of a marriage of our parents. And because it was such a personal story, he stayed very closely in touch with the 3 of us siblings because he really wanted to achieve a kind of authenticity in the telling of his story. Once we gave him permission to write the film, he had the option of never talking to us again. It was his movie to make.
That's right.
But instead, he really involved us in his process. So we had this incredible experience of watching this film coming to life. It was a real privilege to get to be on the inside of this whole work of art. It was really something.
What's he like as a creative partner, as a filmmaker?
Yeah, he is madly intense. He's the most intense guy you ever met. And incredibly nice and without any pretense whatsoever. He's kind of a regular guy. He just happens to be madly intense. But no, he's not pretentious at all. If you see him on a day where he's just home, he's slouching around in, a t-shirt and flip-flops and sweatpants. And his hair is all messed up. And you can tell he didn't even look in the mirror that day, He's that guy.
And your father was proudly normal, right? In so many ways.
He was pretty normal, yeah. Well, when he was just home with the family, he was just a pretty normal guy for a guy who wasn't normal.
Everything Fab Four is presented by Salon.com, the premier news, politics, innovation, and arts website. For more information, visit everythingfab4.com, where you can learn more about our podcast and my latest Beatles-related book, Living the Beatles Legend, The Untold Story of Mal Evans. The Everything Fab Four theme song, Seize the Day, is provided courtesy of Black Rabbit, the high-octane Beatles cover band, an innovative psychedelic rock project from Rockaway Beach, Queens in New York City. Like what you heard today on Everything Fab Four? Be sure to subscribe, give us a rating, and recommend the show to your friends. Plus, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at EF4 Podcast. Distributed by Salon.com, Everything Fab Four is a Wonderwall production. Remember, it's a Beatles world, and everyone has a story.